You cite several hopeful protections and bulwarks for democracy in your book. For example, our broad array of institutions like functional federalism with governors and mayors, the judiciary, decentralized voting, and others. Could you talk about these institutions and these kind of built-in protections?
So the reason I talk about the institutions in the book is to make this point. The Founding Fathers were so wise when they divided power among three branches of government, something that we all take for granted, right? I mean, it's like the holy trinity of Congress, the courts, and the president. We all learn about it from the time that we're in kindergarten on, and we get that, but there's real content to that division of power because the Constitution was written literally in response to the rule of a king. And in this context, king is just a nice fancy word for dictator, right? I mean, that's what the three branches of government are meant to prevent. Thomas Jefferson said on more than one occasion that he believed that the press, a free press, was an essential institution, maybe more important than some of the others. And so we have this sense that by dividing power, we keep anyone from becoming a dictator. And that, I think, is the key point. When you've got a supine Congress and a Supreme Court that seems to be willing to put its thumb on the scales for a president, it's tough for government to work properly. But it has happened before in our country's history. This moment is unique in so many ways, but we have had other moments where things just looked like democracy was done. I mean, we fought a civil war in this country over slavery, and that happened in large part because the Supreme Court refused to say that Black people were citizens of this country, something that one would have thought would have been obvious at that point. It happened in a case called Dred Scott, and I think the facts are worth knowing a little bit about because Dred Scott and his wife and his daughters were taken by the man who enslaved them into free territory. And then they returned to slave territory, and they filed a lawsuit in court saying, when we went into free territory, we became free people. And there's no provision of the law that permits us to be re-enslaved. So we are now free people. And the United States Supreme Court responded by saying, sorry, you don't have the right to sue in court. You're not a citizen. You can't sue. That unbelievably mistaken case took decades to correct, right? It took a civil war, and it wasn't the court that corrected. It was Congress that passed the 14th, 15th Amendments guaranteeing Black people not only freedom from slavery, but other essential rights. And it has been up to the courts on an ongoing basis to expand and implement those laws. I mean, that's why we have the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, because they follow from that. And so that's to say, we can get things wrong. We can go through horrible trauma as a country. We can dangerously deny people their rights and treat them badly. And then we can come back and we can get it right. And we can do that without giving up on democracy, by the way, because one of the stories I tell in the book is the story of the integration of the University of Alabama. I'm sure y'all have seen George Wallace's famous stand in the schoolhouse door. It wasn't much of a stand. He knew he was going to walk away. But he wanted to make this, last stand for segregation. And so a couple of incredibly brave young people, they're the first Black people to integrate the university. And obviously none of that is easy. And one of them is a woman named Vivian Malone Jones, who stays at the university, graduates, goes on to have a really incredible career. But while she's in school in her 4 years, she has experiences like days where she has to decide whether or not it's safe to go to class because there are bombs that are going off in proximity to her apartment. And she stays the course and she stands tall and she does that. She graduates. 50 years later, the university is celebrating the anniversary of its integration. And the sitting Attorney General is a man named Eric Holder, who is Vivian Malone Jones's brother-in-law. You know, there is a straight line from that bravery. I mean, it would have been just as easy for her, frankly, to say, a pox on you, you know, you don't want to acknowledge my humanity and my equality, I'm not going to play your game. And instead, she was willing to put her life on the line to insist that democracy extend its promise to her so that we could have the first African-American Attorney General in the United States 50 years later. And that is what we can do, by the way, if we don't give up.